Hi guys, I just wanted to go over this controlled experiments practice page with you as a little refresher so you know how to do your assignment for today. So hopefully everybody had a great weekend. If you recall on Friday, we talked about the steps of the scientific method and we talked about the 5 main parts of a controlled experiment: the control group, experimental group, independent variable, dependent variable, and extraneous variables. So to just refresh your memory, the control group is a group that you just use for comparison. You don't do anything new to it. It is the untouched group. You are not testing anything new on it. It's just used as a baseline for comparison only. Whereas the experimental group is the group you're changing. It's the group you're testing something new on. And then if you recall, we learned about 3 different types of variables: independent variable, dependent variable, and extraneous variables. Of the 3, extraneous variables are the easiest to remember because those are everything that has to stay the same. Okay, that's everything that has to stay the same between the control group and the experimental group. So you only end up with one thing that changes. So it's a true controlled experiment and the end results are valid. In terms of the independent and the dependent variable, if you recall, the independent variable is what you are testing on that experimental group. So what's the change between the control group and the experimental group? That's the independent variable, what you're testing. And then the dependent variable is what are you looking at or what are you measuring to know if it worked? Okay, so the dependent variable depends on the independent variable. So if we take a look at these 5 examples, the first one says 2 loads of laundry are done. Load A is washed with detergent. Load B is washed with detergent plus a special bleach. Load B turns out brighter and cleaner. So in this scenario, the control group would be load A. You're not doing anything new to it. The experimental group is load B. Okay. The independent variable, what you're testing or what you're changing between the control group and the experimental group, would be the special bleach. The dependent variable, how would you measure it? What would you look at to know if it worked? Well, it said they looked at like the brightness of the clothes or the cleanness of the clothes. And then things that would have to stay the same, extraneous variables would be you'd have to use the same brand wash machine, you'd have to use the same cycle, same temperature water, same amount of detergent, same color and type of clothes being washed, etc. Okay, for number 2, it says car A is filled with regular gas, car B is filled with premium gas. After 6 months, car B is getting more miles per gallon. So in this scenario, the control group would be car A, the experimental group would be car B. The independent variable, what you're testing on the experimental group, what are you doing differently to the experimental group, is the premium gas. The dependent variable, what you're measuring is miles per gallon, right? How far they can drive, how many miles they can get per gallon. And then extraneous variables, in this situation, you'd have to drive like the 2 cars would have to be the same make, model, and year. They'd have to drive on the same terrain. You couldn't have one driving in flat Illinois and one driving in the mountains of Colorado because obviously hills and mountains put more strain on the engine. You'd have to fill them up with the same amount of gas, etc. For number 3, 2 apples are cut into slices. Apple 1 is placed in a bowl in the refrigerator. Apple 2 is also placed in a bowl in the refrigerator, but lemon juice is added to the apple slices. In a few hours, apple 1 is brown while apple 2 is not. So in this scenario, the control group, the untouched group, is apple 1. The experimental group is apple 2. The independent variable, what you're testing, what is changing, is the lemon juice. The dependent variable, what you're measuring, would be the brownness of the apple or the freshness of the apple. And then extraneous variables would be you'd have to use the same type of apple, like you couldn't use a Granny Smith and Red Delicious. The apples would have to be the same type. They'd have to be cut the same way. You couldn't dice one into little pieces and then slice the other one. They'd have to be in the same fridge, kept in the same temperature, the same size bowl, etc. Okay, and as you can see down below here, when you fill out your worksheet you're going to do for homework, it will be in this nice chart form where you can see the answers. But like I said, don't get fooled and get overconfident in thinking you know these. You're going to have to know the definitions of the word. And sometimes when it's in chart form, it's easy to think you know it because they're all right in order there. But on a test or quiz, it's just going to give you a scenario and it's going to say, what's the independent variable in this scenario? And it will give you a new scenario and I say, okay, what's an extraneous variable? Or what's the dependent variable? So you just need to make sure you know the vocab. So there's the answers for the first three. For the situation 4, there are 2 goldfish that are fed once every day. One goldfish is also given a special vitamin, and after 3 months, it's bigger than the other. So they don't label the goldfish A and B in this situation. So you can't say goldfish 1 or goldfish 2 for the control group and the experimental group. You have to be more specific. So the control group would be the goldfish not receiving the special vitamin. The experimental group would be the goldfish receiving the special vitamin. The independent variable is a special vitamin. The dependent variable, what you're measuring, would be size or weight or length. Any of those would apply. And things that would need to stay the same would be they would have to have started off the same size and they would have to be the same type of goldfish. They'd have to be in the same size tank, in identical conditions, identical temperature water. They'd have to get the same amount of food each day. So any of those things will be considered extraneous variables. Okay, and for the final situation, you have plant A is watered once a day and plant B is watered twice a day. After 2 weeks, plant B is taller. So plant A would be your control group, plant B is your experimental group. The independent variable is how often it's watered, or you might say watered twice a day. The dependent variable would be the height of the plants, right? Because you're measuring how tall they are. So the dependent variable would be the height of the plant. And then as you can see, extraneous variables, the plants would have to be grown in the same environment, get the same amount of sunshine, be in the same temperature. You'd have to be growing the same amount of number of plants and then the same type, same species. They'd have to be in the same size pots and in identical soil, etc. Okay, so hopefully that's just a quick refresher of the different parts of the scientific method. And what you're going to work on next is a worksheet where you're going to do the same thing. You're going to give in 8 scenarios, and you have to identify these different parts of each scenario. And then you'll notice the chart goes to number 10. So for 9 and 10, you have to come up with your own little scenario, and then you need to write the answers in the chart. But to get full credit, you need to write out your scenario at the bottom of the chart so that I know what the scenario is, and then I can determine if you identify the correct variables, control group, and experimental group. Okay, so that is how you're going to complete your worksheet for today. Okay, hopefully this helped. Take care.